right, we've taught, I think, in our panel, I think we've underscored the importance of partnerships and advancing new models, new pathways to create funding that are viable to bring this work to scale. I want to introduce Newsha Ajami from the Stanford Center for Water in the West to talk about one of the very important models that we need to look at in thinking holistically about fees and what a framework for a public goods charge might mean. We've talked about downstream beneficiaries some, and I think Newsha is a great person to bring that to life for all of us. Thanks, Newsha.
Thank you, Jay. Hello, good afternoon. I appreciate being here. I've been asked to talk a little bit about public goods charge. I'm sure you all have heard the term, and it has an interesting history in the water sector, but I worked in the Capitol for about a year, and I witnessed failing of the public goods charge for energy firsthand. And it came to me as a surprise because it had been a very useful and beneficial program, and I was always curious to see what happened. So when I started my job at Stanford, I decided to sort of look into it and actually look at public goods charge from a different angle instead of focusing on do we want it or not in the water sector, to see we already have a model in California for energy. Can we look and see what it did, was it successful, and can we replicate some of those success stories in the water sector? So what I'm going to present here is more like a very different angle to the public goods charge story. Obviously, we had a long conversation right now about the lack of funding for some of the water needs in California. We have relied on general obligation bonds for a long time to meet some of our funding shortfalls that we have for some of these projects. As some of you know, most of you know actually, general obligation bonds are, hard to put together, hard to pass, and also, they are costly, even though since for a long, long time, taxpayers need to pay back these general obligation bonds. Just to give you an example, right now, every household in California pays about $120 per year to pay back water bonds that we have had over the years. So often this is an unspoken sort of number because people don't pay attention to it, but the reality is we want it or not, this cost is there, and we have to spend money on our infrastructure and our water needs. We looked at the water and the public goods charge in the energy sector. Obviously, Mr. Johnson mentioned about similarities between water sector and energy sectors. They both provide public commodities to the state of California. We have utilities that rely on centralized systems, very complex centralized supply systems, and also they both have different economic. They both have sort of water is a human right, and public good. Energy is slightly different. 80% of the utilities in the energy sector are investment-owned, 20% publicly owned. It's totally opposite in the water. Water is 80% publicly owned utilities, 20% investor-owned. So there's that slight difference. And also, we have 50 electric utilities in California, more than 2,000 water utilities. From very, very small ones to the large ones such as SFPC, LADWP, and many others. As I mentioned, in the 1990s, during the electricity deregulation, legislature implemented its public goods charge on electricity use, per usage fee on customer utility bill, about 1 to 2% of the bill, say the $100 bill, $1 to $2 per month, collected by both IOUs, investor-owned utilities and publicly owned utilities, and it was in place from 1998 to 2012. The difference between the IOUs and PO. So first of all, the public goods charge was, there were 3 specific priorities defined for the program: energy efficiency, renewable energy, and research and development. And the difference between IOUs and POUs was that IOUs had to collect the money, and they kept some money within their utility and invested in energy efficiency, and the rest of the money would go to the state, and the state would distribute that money through California Energy Commission. The publicly owned utilities actually kept that money in-house. They had more discretion on how they want to spend it. They still had to spend it on those 3 pre-specified priorities, in addition to low-income communities. So they also had they could spend some of that money to help some of the low-income households to pay for their energy bill. So just to give you a rough estimate for the investor-owned utilities, about 27% of the money was used for renewables, 57% on energy efficiency, and 16% are on RD&D. Give you a rough example for the public utilities, I have like a few examples here. One is Sacramento Municipal Utility, about 60% on energy efficiency, 10 to 20% on RD&D, and another 10% on renewables, and another 10% on low-income communities. And then we have like Modesto Irrigation District that spend roughly about 30% on energy efficiency. Very small amount are on the RD&D, but about 50% on low-income households. So they had the discretion to decide how much they want to invest, whatever the priority was within their district and within their utility. To highlight some of the success of the public goods charge, it was very successful in increasing investment in innovation and energy projects. We brought a lot of public and private investment and catalyzed a lot of innovation in the state, as you know. Just to give you an example, corporate venture and venture capital investment in California from 1998 was the year that public goods charge passed, was about 0 and increased to about $9 billion by 2011. And that number has been sort of fluctuating between around that number for the past few years. Talking about energy efficiency actually skyrocketed in California. IOUs, as I said, manage their own energy efficiency program. From 1998 till now, energy efficiency levels and conservation levels in California almost doubled from the level they were in. The rate of change in energy efficiency doubled during the public goods charge era. And another question that I always get is like how that money was distributed. Most of the money actually, if you look at the IOUs, most of the money stayed within their own boundaries. These are large investor-owned utilities. However, they actually ended up spending some of the money beyond their boundaries, partly because of the infrastructure needs, or very similar, Upper Watershed provides services to you, so you spend some of that money in that other region that you are dependent on, but most of the money stayed within the region. And as this is pretty well known in California, we have a very diverse energy portfolio right now, renewable energy portfolio, which part of it can be actually, part of it relied on public goods charge, and the capacity, the renewable portfolio standard capacity installed in California between 2003 and 2012 went from almost 0 megawatt to about 4,500 megawatts. So it's a significant increase. And California was the first state in the nation to implement public goods charge for energy. However, since then, we have many other states, about 21 states, and also in addition to Washington, D.C., have implemented public goods charge for electricity or established public good funds to focus on energy efficiency and renewable energies, renewable energy. Some of these programs are statewide, similar to California. Some of them are regionally set up, so we have different governance structure. So I'm sure you're wondering, so this is a very glorious and successful story, why it failed. Multiple things. One, they did not do a very good job in collecting data and being transparent in the way the money was spent. You know, nowadays we have a lot more sort of innovative solutions in hand to kind of collect a lot of data and organize them and do data management, even though we are not doing as much as we should. But the reality is Energy Commission could not really demonstrate substantial benefits. Energy landscape actually changed from the time public goods charge was implemented to the time it sort of sunsetted, and I'm going to talk a little bit about that actually in a minute. And also, it was hard to kind of establish what's the value of investing money in research, which sometimes that is always a very hard nut to crack, but the reality is it was really extremely helpful to the state. As I said, lesson learned, transparency and record keeping was exceptionally important, which should be focused on if something like this is implemented in California for water. Reevaluation of the program. By the time that as I said, public goods charge was sunsetted, our priorities had changed too. You know, we have already had a sort of a machine that was running. So we had to sort of rethink and reevaluate where else do we need to spend this money or how else we can spend the money. So it's very important to reevaluate these priorities depending on what's going on in various regions every 5 years, every 10 years to make sure we are not going to, you know, we don't end up spending money on things that we don't need or that are sort of already common in the community. Research and development, but has to be clearly defined. Now, actually, energy sector is doing that. One thing I wanted to mention is when I engage with people on this topic, often people ask me, so why you know, energy efficiency, energy sector is a lot of investor-owned utilities. You know, water is very different. Yes, water is different, but just remember, we had public goods charge for electricity for public utilities as well. And those utilities, their charge to collect public goods charge was not sunsetted. They're still collecting that money, actually, because they were not part of that time limit that investor-owned utilities had. And they have been using that money for all those priorities that I mentioned, depending on what's going on in their region. So water actually has an opportunity, the water sector has the opportunity to think about how they want to do something like this. Do they want to do it statewide, similar to energy? Do they want to do it regional? Such as actually Metropolitan Water District of California does have, Water District of Southern California actually has a public goods charge style fee already set up for the past 16 years or more, actually. They call it water stewardship rate, and they collect it on the retailers that they provide water to. And they have been using that money actually to diversify water supply portfolio in Southern California and promote conservation. So it is possible. Or this can happen in the local utilities, such as, you know, I give you an example, Los Angeles Department of Water and Power, they're already doing this for energy. You know, they can be a model to do that for water. Obviously, I'm not blind to the challenges we have in changing rates and setting fees for water in California. Energy was not included in some of those regulatory challenges we have for water, such as Prop 218 or other propositions that we have. But having said that, I believe that there is a lot of value to have this discussion in a broader sense and see how can we use that example and sort of take some of those messages and learnings and implement it in the water sector. And with that, I'm done with my presentation. Happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much. Any questions, comments from the panel or our board?
Panel joiner as well.
Oh, that's right, you're introducing the panel, so why
Yes.
don't we go straight to that, and
Perfect.
thank you.